Hey everyone, welcome to Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. This podcast is all about farmers markets, how to increase your market business success while providing people with fresh food. Farmers markets are essential. Whether you're a farmers market manager or a small farmer or food maker selling at farmers markets, you have found just the right podcast. This week on Tent Talk, we're discussing how to navigate new laws on food carts and food safety permits at farmers markets. Hey everyone, I'm one of your hosts, Bridget Myers. I'm a longtime farmers market manager and education coordinator at Farmers Market Pros.
And I'm Kat Fields-White, Director of San Diego Markets, still an active farmers market manager and consultant, founder of Farmers Market Pros, and host of Intense, the Farmers Market Conference, and the Farmers Market Pros community.
And I'm Justine Marzoni-Mead, Tent Talk producer, marketing director for Farmers Market Pros, and logistics coordinator for Intense, the Farmers Market Conference, which is in just a mere number of days.
Right just around the corner.
Weeks away, everyone. Weeks? Maybe 2 weeks?
Yeah.
When is it? Oh
yeah.
my gosh. Well, you better have your ticket. Or else. Or else you're really going to miss out.
Still available.
Still available.
Still sign up.
Get it now.
Yeah.
Push pause. Get your ticket.
Get your ticket.
We'll
Make those airline reservations.
Pack your bags.
Pack your
That's right.
bags.
And we'll see you soon. Today's episode of Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is supported by Food for All, making it easy to sell local food online, build relationships, and improve margins. Food for All makes it simple to accommodate online orders for pickup at your farmers market. Their straightforward portal streamlines setup and management of your online marketplace, keeping admin time and staff costs to a minimum while increasing producer profitability. It's flexible, easy to use, and loved by producers, customers, and market managers. Find more information by clicking the Food for All logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com.
Welcome back to Tent Talk. This week, we're talking about some recent shifts in public policy surrounding street vendors, food safety, and farm processing that are impacting farmers markets across the country. So what kinds of changes happened at the lawmaking level this year?
So there's a lot going on.
There's too much going on,
So
to be honest.
let me give you a roundup, a snapshot, if you will. So currently, 38 state legislatures have considered food safety legislation. No surprise here, but California and New York passed the most new laws, as we tend to do.
We're so extra.
Yeah, coast to coast. But changes have happened all over the U.S. So South Carolina amended their home-based food law to include online mail order services, which is interesting. You can ship stuff that you make at home, and to allow labeling that doesn't require the producer's home address.
Which people will like. Our cottage food people are so nervous about
Yeah,
that.
they're like, I hated these pickles. I'm going to go drive to this person's house
on this person's
and
door.
tell them to their face.
Wait, have I told this story before where I was shopping at a market in Phoenix once I had already moved to San Diego? I was like with my dad and we were picking up some bread from a market at the Town and Country Market. And I looked at the label and it was a cottage food and it had my dad's like address from when I was a kid.
What?
Yes, it was the same. I almost said it right now on the air. I probably shouldn't do that. But yeah, and I was like, why is this address on here? And then I was like, oh my gosh, this is where you make the production. I'm like, do you live in this house? She lived in the house that I grew up in.
How
my
funny.
It was
And
so
they
funny.
there. That's so funny.
But then it was like, what if I was creepy?
Yeah, I mean, like, that's kind of a meet cute.
Yeah.
But it could have been, like,
I could have been like,
dangerous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes me feel nervous. I've never actually heard of anybody going to a cottage food producer's house and having, raising a stink. They want to know, they want the address on there, the health department does, because, if there's a foodborne illness or something, they want to be able to go there.
Yeah, traceability.
But still,
Yeah.
creepy.
It's
So
spooky.
South Carolina now, they give you can put a label on there that has your number through the state Health and Human Services Department, I think it is, and then that tracks to where your production is, but you don't have to actually show that address to the customer.
That makes way
I
more
like
sense. You
that.
just have it on file with the health department, but you
Yeah.
don't need to print it on the labels. That's more sensical. Okay.
Good job, South Carolina.
Good job.
That's right.
Okay, so in Utah, the fire code was changed to allow micro enterprise kitchens to operate without a hood.
That's random.
All right, well,
Yeah. All right.
Okay, I guess you don't have to clean your hood because that's not fun.
I will say that
Let me tell
restaurants
you.
that have to install big hood and fire suppression systems are
Yeah.
probably way jealous.
Yeah, I ran a burger restaurant for a very long time, and our hood was like the bane of my existence. So Don't know. Just having PTSD right
I'm
now.
sure
Sorry.
people that do like
Don't say
stove
that.
and hood
Don't
cleaning
say
are
that.
mad.
Yeah, they're
right.
pissed because they made buku bucks.
Didn't pour enough
That's right.
lobbying dollars into that one.
I guess
right.
not.
Okay, so Maryland increased their annual cottage food revenue cap from $25,000 annually to $50,000 annually.
I love that.
which I fully support.
Fully support. It's
Because-
a real business.
California's
let those
done that a
people
few
make some
times.
money.
Yeah.
Okay. So while cottage food has been a popular term for, up to now, food freedom is kind of the new buzzword that's been circulating. We've been hearing a lot about that. I think anytime like public policy stuff that's like blah, 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 freedom.
Yeah, it's a
Kind
little
of,
scary.
it's
but
a little like
Rubs me
spikes
the
my
best.
heart rate and
Makes you a little nervous.
blood pressure a little bit.
Yeah.
But Tennessee's new Food Freedom Act allows homemade food to be sold without any permitting or licensing. So they're real going wild, wild west out there.
Going to the wall there.
And their stated intent is to, quote, recognize the right of individuals to produce, procure, and consume homemade foods of their choice, free from unnecessary and anti-competitive regulations, and to foster small businesses, innovation, and economic growth.
Now, I will say that people that are producing large quantities of food in a commercial kitchen or restaurants would actually find that this is anti-competitive because
True.
it's kind of changing the playing field. So apparently for you to eat food safely that comes from a restaurant, you have to have all these regulations. But for you to eat food safely that comes from a home kitchen, you don't. So that's a little confusing for me.
Yeah, it's tricky. I don't live in Tennessee, so it's hard to speak to this particular issue. But I guess it's like if you want to eat a hot dog that someone made on their own home stove.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
went straight to
it's,
hot dogs.
it's definitely buyer beware
I was trying to
stuff.
think of something on the margins.
Well, I just feel like, does the consumer realize where their food is? Like, is the general consumer going to realize that this law has changed and that no one's really getting permits or being,
Here's what I
certified for
think.
this?
Based on what we went through in California when the cottage food laws passed, when it was still a bone of contention, it was a referendum, they were voting on it. I don't think the consumer knows what the current conditions are.
Yeah.
And they don't appear to care.
Surprisingly, consumers don't know a lot.
They
Myself
don't.
included.
I
Shocking.
mean, when they say homemade food, people
Yeah.
think it's all homemade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Homemade soup. They figure that's, Campbell's is, making it at home on somebody's stove.
I love eating at Campbell's house.
Right?
The Campbell family, they just
Mrs. Campbell, she makes the best.
bold flavors,
Right?
just the down-home vibe. Great hosts.
Great host.
Yes. So I don't think the consumers
Yeah.
really know the difference. I think it's more that restaurants are going to be resentful that they
Yeah.
have to install grease
Yeah.
traps and 3-compartment sinks, but somebody cooking at home does not.
I'm wondering if when this shakes out, maybe they don't need a permit or a license, but if there's anything on their packaging that requires them to say this is some sort of something that sets them apart from another type of manufactured good.
Yeah, and I think that's
So-
coming up. That's
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. South Dakota passed a food freedom law as well. And we've heard from farmers market managers in North Carolina that's working hard to get a similar bill proposed there this month. So it sounds like South Dakota is working on, they did some good stuff, and North Carolina is like, let's do a similar
They're
thing.
aiming that way. Yeah. We had a farmers market manager reach out to us and say, hey, the health department just came in and told us all our vendors had to have permits, and they've never had permits before. The market's been open for 4 years. Nobody's ever had a permit. Nobody's ever asked for a permit, and now they want them all to have permits. And she was shocked and appalled. I did tell her that we've always had to have permits.
I'm
It's not
shocked and
actually-
appalled that you didn't
They're
have
like,
permits.
papers, we don't need no stinking papers. Is that the quote?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Nachos, I think, but yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so they're
right.
working on it, and they are surrounded by other states that have these food freedom laws that are essentially one form or another of cottage food laws. So I know that that manager and some other managers and related folks in policy are working on that in North Carolina.
Good. Okay, so specific to farmers, Georgia, Kansas, Maine, and New Hampshire all addressed dairy sales, including raw milk. So this is a biggie. Indiana and Illinois also modified the rules required to sell poultry, rabbit, and eggs at farmers markets, and also specified cottage food rules. I feel like milk stuff must have been hard to pull off.
It's dicey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm going to say the food freedom crowd was pushing hard to get that one done because that's been a big bone of contention for a long time because a lot of people will tell you that raw milk is like the best thing ever. It solves eczema issues. It's healthier for you. Commodity milk has sugar added to it. A lot of consumers don't realize that. There's a lot of weird things that go on in the dairy process. There's a big dairy lobby that has kept it that way, and so folks that want to sell, that's right, got milk, got sugar-fried milk,
got eczema,
right. So, we've kind of been in favor of farmers being able to let the consumer make a choice, an educated choice. So this is interesting to see that seems to be kind of moving off the mark now a little bit.
Can California get with the program because our dairy restrictions are absurd here? So.
Although it's really county by county, because there's a state code in California and then the counties get to interpret. So there's a bunch of cheesemakers in Northern California.
So I guess San Diego County needs to get it together.
What did Monty Python? I don't know. I'm like movie quote person today. Maybe because I ate breakfast.
That's it.
You're on it.
My brain's sharp. But wasn't it Monty Python who said, "Blessed be the cheesemakers"?
Blessed be the cheesemakers?
Yeah.
Sounds like something that they would say on one of his
Call
movies.
your dad. He'll know.
Yeah. I should call my dad. He's a Monty Python expert. And also I agree. And I love some dairy and cheese at our markets. Anyways, that's a different podcast episode. Well, in California, new laws relate to everything from allowing wood-burning ovens at markets.
Ooh, pizza.
Yeah, sounds amazing. A little smoky. And markets and events, to addressing the eternal discussion about whether hand washing or gloves are more effective. Figure it out.
Big new laws on that. So, especially during COVID, everybody was about, let's put gloves on everybody. But the health department actually says they'd prefer to use the hand washing stations because people tend to put on gloves in the morning and leave those same gloves on as they switch from handling money to handling food back to doing the dishes.
I have seen with my own two eyes one of our farmers smoking a cigarette while wearing the gloves.
Yeah, so that's not. So not
I guess who that is.
Yeah, I know exactly who it is. Just becomes a part of your body once you put that glove on, right?
Which makes it, not maybe clearly helping you sanitize.
No, I think no. It's a false protection.
Yes.
Okay, well, they're addressing the discussion. Okay, well, we'll see what happens. They upheld the requirement that cottage food producers include a bold, quote, made in a home kitchen, quote, statement on their labels. So that's helpful.
I think that's good.
Yeah.
I think that's good.
I just think people should be able to make an informed choice. It became very clear to us in that whole period where they were passing the laws that consumers didn't know and mostly didn't care. But I think for those of us who have worked in food service or who are concerned about cats on the kitchen counter, we should be able to make an informed choice about whether or not we want to buy food from a kitchen that's never been inspected.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to know. I just need the info. And they continue to expand direct marketing laws to make more aspects of selling fish model the regulations applied to farmers offering produce and meat.
Right. So they're, so fishermen now, similar to farmers can do a lot of things in the booth that a temporary food facility permit holder cannot.
Yeah.
Falls under a whole different set of regulations. And so they're kind of sweeping the fishermen over into the ag regulations. Not exactly, but they're modeling it that way.
I think that's smart, too.
That makes sense to me. I mean, they've always separated and said, well, the fishermen don't raise that fish. But again, when you get to food safety issues, it doesn't really matter whether you raise it or not. It's either a safe way to handle food or there's not. Yeah, so so now they can prep in their booths more than they used to be able to, and they kind of sweep them under a set of regulations that look a lot more like ag regulations than the Department of Health regulations that apply to prepared food vendors.
And what would that do? Just make it so, like, they can be in a different part of the market?
Different part of the market. I haven't seen that actually yet, and that's probably going to trickle down to a county call because a lot of these laws in our state are enacted at the state level but interpreted at the county level.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I think more that they'll be able to, say, fillet a fish without having a temporary food facility permit from the Department of Health.
Okay, so it's saving them some dollars. It's saving them some red tape they don't have to cut through.
Yeah, less permitting and
heaven knows. If you thought that fishermen, or if you thought that farmers were not
Gnarly.
social butterflies and not enthusiastic about regulations, then you've never met a fisherman because they're a whole different level.
it's a whole nother breed.
That's right.
Oh, boy. We love our fishermen.
We do. Yeah, no, it's
So
awesome.
many
I
of
mean,
them
and the
here,
good news is it'll make fish cheaper for the consumer because
Yeah.
they won't have to go
Good
through,
point.
the expensive permitting, and they don't have to send it to somebody else to process and then get it back, which is also what happens in the case of a lot of meat and things. So
Yeah.
it makes it very tricky. It would be great if the state would extend that and make things a little bit easier for people processing, especially small meat, chicken and rabbit and that kind of thing.
And in terms of food safety, from what, I am not a food scientist, but from what we've heard from some ranchers and some people that we've spoken to at our markets and on the pod, it does seem like the transferring between plants and processing areas, that is really a hazard.
Yeah, that's
And
where
arguably, if the same person who caught it is then processing it, it could potentially be a safer situation.
Right, and we think the same thing actually of especially small game. So rabbit and chicken and some of the small meat and protein that you get a lot of times can be processed, I believe, more cleanly, more safely on the farm where the farmer has control over it.
Especially if you're only processing your own stuff and it's
Right.
not being processed in the same area where there's cows or fish from
Right.
other farms, and then it just is a little harder to keep your eye on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a lot more control than the farmer and the fisherman would have more control over it, the rancher, just because I've heard a lot of stories from our, ranchers at the markets over the many years that just like losing product in transit, where they have to make these long drives up to processing centers, and then if someone's driving it back for you, refrigeration goes out or whatever happens, it's like they lose product, they lose like a control over it. So it'd be nice if they could process it and really manage that from, A to Z.
Yeah, and there's a lot of consensus that the animals themselves get so stressed from the transportation process that it affects the meat. That they're the stress that
all
they
like,
so
Yeah.
it tightens up the muscles and things because they're stressed. So.
Interesting.
Yeah, so if you have a farm where, your whole shtick is the animals are in a pleasant environment up
Right.
until the point that you're
One
processing
bad day.
them. Yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, so that could make a huge, huge difference. So I love that. So there are more laws and regulations still under consideration too. So how is this all happening?
Kat?
Well,
Take it away, Kat.
Please explain.
You know,
this.
so
Got our
there's-
encyclopedia.
well, I read a lot.
Yes.
I will say.
Read a lot.
There's pros and cons for all of these laws. So
Yeah.
certainly we all believe that food safety regulations make some sense. You want to watch and make sure that we're processing food safely and that the people that are making your food or raising your food, getting it to market, are taking care of it all along the way. And that's usually just a process of education. So the regulations are in place to ensure that people have been educated, have some way to check and make sure that they've been through a food safety manager certification or they've had some education or some classes that teach them how to manage food safely. So that to me totally makes sense. And then, of course, there's the whole flee with a sledgehammer process that happens where once you're on a roll of making regulations, it's kind of like remodeling your house. While we're at it,
Yeah.
let's regulate this.
Give a
Let's
mouse a
control
cookie.
this. Yeah, exactly. So, it seems to me that in a lot of these cases this year, they're taking laws and regulations that were already established and they're walking some of them back and trying to look at them from a more logical viewpoint as to, is this really a food safety thing? Or is this just an arbitrary regulation? Or has it come from lobbyists? A lot of times there has certainly been some things that have suppressed farmers markets and producers that come from big grocery lobbyists and big production group lobbyists. And
The 3-compartment sink lobby really got us there.
Big Sink just
Big Sink just
gets
took
involved
over.
with
I mean,
everything.
there's regulations at our markets that are really hampering the operations and are really nonsensical. So
Yeah.
love to not have a 3-compartment sink for every 2 vendors or whatever. So yeah, I think it's nice to take a look at these regulations and approach them in a more sensical way. But yeah, that's a question is who's leading the charge on this and why?
yeah, who's in favor and who's not in favor.
Yeah.
So those are, and we do that when we vote for all kinds of things, but including at the food service level and regulations that come down about food. One of the things you want to do if you're trying to decide whether to support one of these things, whether to advocate for them or against them, is to look at who originated this, who is backing it, what kind of organizations are coming out in support of these rules. That might give you a hint about which side you want to be on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something that, I do when we're looking at the ballot and deciding to vote. It's like, okay, who are teachers voting for?
Yeah.
But I do want to remind all of our listeners that just a couple weeks ago we had Kathy Zeman on from the Minnesota Farmers Market Association and a million other things that she's involved in and accolades that she has. I feel like she needs like a million little addendums after her name, but look her up. She's fabulous. But we did a really great episode with her a couple weeks back about advocating for small farmers. So this, I feel like, kind of falls in line with that. And if you're a market manager out there somewhere in the U.S. and we named one of your states, maybe hook up with your local farmers market association or talk to other market managers in the area. And you might want to find out who is behind some of these legislations in your area. And if you like them, maybe you join that cause. And if you don't like what's moving forward, that might be an opportunity for you to connect with some of the market managers or vendors in your area and, join that discussion.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. I mean, you should be advocating for the ones that will help you and your farmers and vendors, and you might want to be advocating against ones that don't seem to make sense to you.
That are going to undermine efforts that are put in place, by you and people that are participating in your market. So, yeah just like like we talked about doing cottage food without any permits, that is really great because it helps like these small businesses. But then it's like, well, what about your vendors who do have to get permits? So there's like, is it equitable? Is it fair? It's just, we want to lift all these people up to make it easier for them to do business. But at the same time, we can't just be like picking and choosing who's getting a benefit, because that just turns into a whole other kind of spiral story. And then those businesses are impacted.
That's tricky.
So, true. Yeah.
And there seems to be a tone, at least in California and in many of these other states as well, but we're just, intimately affected and familiar with the California process. There seems to be a tone that if you only produce a little bit of something, you shouldn't be subject to all the regulations and requirements of somebody that produces a lot. So the Microenterprise Home Kitchen Operations Law, which has really expanded this year, California really pushed that. There was a big group that was pushing for that. And I think their motivating factor, a lot of it came out of L.A., and what they're really trying to do is protect, in particular, immigrant food vendors that are working from carts or that had little, quasi-restaurants in their homes, in a garage or a living room or something where they made meals. And so in order to boost their economic security, there's a whole group that's really pushed this microenterprise home kitchen operation thing. And I know that it's confusing to restaurant owners because they've been required to do so much infrastructure installation and things in the name of food safety. Well, if you're serving 30 dinners a night, how does that, the fact that you're only serving 30 and not 60 or 90 covers, how does that make those food regulations now suddenly not necessary?
And I understand that sentiment totally, because it's kind of like, well, I just have a little E. coli on my counter. It's like a little bit could still be harmful when it comes to icky stuff in a kitchen. However, kind of like going back to the Tennessee law that we were talking about of like wanting to protect like people can make their own decisions for themselves. I think when it does come down to like an elote cart or like a very small restaurant within someone's home, I think consumers do understand when it comes down to those teensy tiny like micro enterprises, the difference there between like a very small somebody selling a couple of tamales out of a cooler bag in a neighborhood versus somebody selling tamales at a farmer's market.
Yeah, I think the consumer knows.
The consumer, I think, understands
the
risk that they're taking.
But from a risk perspective, how is it different?
I'm not saying that the risk is different, but I'm saying that like I think the consumer understands the difference between buying something from like a person in your neighborhood and buying something from an established business.
Yeah, it's a quandary for me. I mean, it either takes a 3-compartment sink to keep you healthy or it doesn't.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that it doesn't. I'm not arguing whether or not the risk is different or that the risk is lowered. I'm just saying that like
the consumer
understands. Like, if you go to your friend's house for dinner, their cat is probably on their counter.
Right.
And it's like, that's just, you don't really think about it because you're at somebody's house for dinner. Yeah. But, like, when you're at a restaurant, they better
not have a cat
exactly.
in the kitchen.
And it's like, I'm just saying that, like, I think there is there's a risk that you're kind of willing to take when it's somebody that you know on a very small scale. And I think that is... Not saying that you know everybody selling tamales on the corner. But I think that is kind of the difference there.
I think that's where they're coming from.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of problem with the logic of it. It's either, and honestly, I think restaurants are overregulated. I think a lot of the things that the government makes restaurants do, given that most people in restaurants do have food education and are inspected somewhat regularly, probably are overkill.
Mm-hmm. And also that, just having grown up in a restaurant and run a restaurant for many years, the inspection process, I mean, the rules that we have to follow, yes, when they come in, hopefully we see them coming in before they come in and we run around and do a bunch of stuff, but like they're not there every day. So it's like, some of those things are not getting followed every day. So it just, this is like bigger story, but like, I feel like the whole process of regulations is just not very consistent. And so it makes it hard to like wrap my brain around like, why are we doing this? What's the purpose of this? And then when you start over regulating things, it's like, well, wait a minute, like why? And then you're not consistently checking to make sure that these regulations that you have in place that we all have to pay a lot of money for or pay a lot of attention or spend a lot of time doing, those are not even like getting checked up on. So, or you're coming to our market a lot and inspecting because we're a big market, but then the market down the street has the same food vendors, like some of our same vendors, but they're not getting inspected very often because they're just a smaller market. So it just seems like consistency would be
Consistently,
great. Consistently don't inspect us, actually.
So to bring this back to farmers markets, why are we talking about these changes in food safety laws or street vending laws? So how might this be impacting specifically street vendor laws, different market managers, different farmers, different vendors at farmers markets?
So I think some of the street vendor laws may result in you having more unauthorized vendors setting up on the outskirts of your market. So you don't have control over them. You're not being sure that they have permits or that they have food education, safety education. You don't know if they have insurance, and I'm going to guess that in a lot of cases they don't. I know that San Diego County, for instance, specifically chose to not require street vendors to have liability insurance, where farmers market vendors have to have liability insurance. So again, just, it changes the level playing field thing to sort of a different deal. You're probably going to get vendors applying to your markets without permits or appalled by the idea that they should get insurance because they're confused by the laws and which laws apply to who and, why is being in a farmer's market different. And then that means, of course, potential liability for your market organization, because if somebody at your market makes somebody sick or, doesn't have their own insurance and isn't naming you as an additional insured, if something happens, you're the one with the deeper pockets, at least visibly, at least in perception, and you may end up with a lawsuit or something that's difficult. So I definitely hear about it from talking to other managers that it's the same in many places. When there's a set of regulations, you have to meet the minimum regulations, but you're allowed to make your regulations more stringent. You can't make them less stringent. You can't choose to ignore some regulations. But for instance, recently, and I'm not sure if this was county or state, but I know that recently there's been something in the law, I think it came down from the state, but I was talking to the county about it, where if somebody has less than 25 square feet that they're selling from, and this was
like a 5x5
a 5x5 tent, which is not at all what they were thinking when they wrote the law. They were thinking about a food cart, because a lot of these things, the motivation has come from trying to protect the cart vendors in LA and some other areas. So the way it was written was that if you have less than 25 square feet of sales space and a table, you don't need a permit of any kind to sell food. So at the farmer's market, we could place somebody in a 5x5 pop-up tent without a permit, theoretically. So how do we decide that? So then it becomes our choice, because we can make things more stringent. So do we say that really small vendors don't have to have a permit, but the guy in the 10x10 tent next to them does have to have all these permits? And the permits are not cheap. They're expensive. And
it's a significant thing we're talking about.
$650, $700 some dollars a year
the
for
cost
that
plus
permit.
The commercial kitchen rental, plus
that's right.
the insurance and all that
stuff.
stuff.
Because you have to have the commercial kitchen space to get that permit.
And you have to have the food safety manager class in order to get the kitchen space to get the permit.
It's not just like the $695 for the permit or whatever. It's all these other things.
Right. So is that fair? And, of course, again, it means liability for us if we're taking people with no permits and no insurance and that. So
it's an interesting argument too, if in that way, say a market manager wanted to make their market more accessible to people who couldn't do that. They could do some sort of thing where it's like, we do an internal food safe, we have a food safety person come in at the beginning of the season.
You could, but then you still, even if you did that, could not exempt 10 by 10s from having a permit.
Everyone's in a 5 by 5.
Yeah, that's right. All tiny, tiny booths from now on.
Tiny anarchy market.
Yeah, so it's funny. And I think the other thing that's going to happen from that is that because we'll have the option of whether or not to require those permits and things, some markets will decide to require them. And some markets will choose not to. They'll choose to put a lot of unpermitted people in there. And so then it becomes the same situation we have with things like liability insurance sometimes, where we'll have somebody apply to our market and they're shocked that we require insurance because there's smaller markets that are, a little more food freedom based that are out there that are not requiring these things, or they're not checking people's permits, or they're not checking the labels on their food to make sure they're legal.
That's already a thing.
Yeah, it's already a thing. So this is just going to kind of scale that up. I think that it's going to become a competitive thing that you'll see certain vendors want to go to markets that are more heavily regulated and that they feel like have a more equitable set of requirements. And there's some vendors that are going to want to go where it's a little more Wild West.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, if you go to a market that's all umbrellas,
you'll know.
If no one has a market or a tent bigger than 5 by 5, you could be clued in.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, that makes it difficult, too, just because, from the consumer's standpoint, they usually don't know, they don't know the background, differences between, a market that requires insurance and a market that doesn't, right? They're not going to know that. And the market manager, it doesn't matter until it matters. So if someone trips over your tent, then you really might start checking for insurance if you come into a situation. But also, if someone gets sick from food bought at a tent that isn't required to have any permits, I think a general consumer standpoint might turn into farmers markets are not regulated and you can get sick from anything and no one has a permit. I just feel like this is a story that's, worst case scenario, obviously running in the back of my mind. So it just kind of, I don't know. Yeah. I'm on the edge because I do feel like we're overregulated. We overregulate, and there's really successful, amazing, incredible food businesses that can't keep up with the permits and the regulations, and they end up going out of business. And we've seen it, right, over the past 14 years doing markets. I feel like it's devastating, and I wish that they would get more reasonable about it. And so I don't want that to happen, but I also just have that concern, if we're going to lift a bunch of regulations or go totally unregulated, what is going to happen then? So.
Well, and for me, it's a lack of consistency. Yeah. You're lifting regulations on some people, but not on other people.
And I think this is maybe a point that we could tie it back into our mission here at Farmers Market Pros of getting farmers markets on even within the scope of all of these conversations. Had somebody who had experience with farmers market been in the room when they made that decision about the 25 square feet, they would be like, wait a second.
Yeah. How does that apply to little tents?
Exactly. So I think that bringing it back is we need to find a way where farmers markets are included in this conversation. And it's not just food carts and grocery stores and restaurants, but that recognizing that farmers markets are a place where a lot of people get food. And so they should be considered, and that we should just be part of those rules.
The theme of almost all my talks at all conferences this year has been we need to take our seat at the table, that farmers markets need to be consistently speaking up to remind people that we're an important part of the food system, that we have an enormous economic impact on farmers and small food makers, that we strengthen the food chains in our neighborhoods and our states. And so we need to keep reminding people of that. Relative to that, one of those laws that happened last year was that the legislature in Maryland enacted a law that grants a property tax credit towards supermarkets that move into a food desert. And that's a great thing, for sure. I mean, we want to see food deserts, or what we're more commonly now calling neighborhoods impacted by food apartheid. They should get supermarkets, and the idea that the government will subsidize supermarkets to go in there is great. Why aren't we getting those same subsidies for farmers markets that go into food apartheid affected areas? And the reason that we do not see those subsidies going to farmers markets is because we're not speaking up, because the grocery business has a huge lobby and they're making sure that this happens for them. We need to speak up and make sure that it happens for us as well. So that's an important thing. One bright side before we wrap this all up is that there is a law that was pushed by both markets and restaurants in New York. And I'm bringing this up because we talked about this on an earlier episode about delivery guys and things that would come in and say, oh, we're delivering from the Lily Mercado, without ever talking to us. We didn't know what relation it was. They were kind of riding on the reputation we have for keeping things safe without us.
Pull our logo from the website.
and pop on things.
Pluck our photos.
Well, there's a new law in New York that requires third-party delivery services to have a valid current agreement with a merchant before they advertise, promote, or sell the merchant's products on their platform. And it prohibits the inclusion of an indemnity clause in such agreement. So we cannot be responsible if some delivery person picks up from the market, takes it to a home, doesn't treat the food well on the way, doesn't keep it refrigerated, it spoils, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Smart.
So
that's
should be
good
true
news.
everywhere.
Yeah,
Why
so let's
isn't
make that a
just
federal
law?
thing.
Yeah. Come on. Yeah, I would love to see that spread.
Yeah.
That's,
so some of these laws are awesome.
yeah.
And some of them are well-intentioned and maybe not quite as well thought out as they should be.
Yeah.
Some of them, we're talking about some of the good things that have happened. There's certainly other laws where they're imposing stiffer regulations that maybe aren't necessary. So
Yeah.
overall lesson here, folks, keep an eye on what's happening in your legislature. Pull it up online from time to time, see what's happening. If you've got a farmers market association in your region, tune into them. If they're not really staying on top of legislation, encourage them to do that. Encourage them to add somebody on their team that really keeps an eye on that and that maybe sends people to the legislature to talk when these issues are coming up. And if you're not on a committee, almost all of these things have a kind of a public listening and public question period that you can write in and add questions and thoughts to the process of making these laws. So, again, let's pull our chair up to the table and be a part of the discussion. Thanks for listening today, and big thanks to Food for All, making it easy to sell local food online, build relationships, and improve margins. Find more information by clicking their logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com.
Farmers markets are all about connection, and all of us, operators, farmers, and vendors, keep learning. Connect with people just like you from various parts of the country and share what's happening in your area in the terrific conversations over in our private Facebook group, the Farmers Market Pros Community. If you're actively involved in a farmers market, please find us there, answer the 3 qualifying questions, and join the group. You can also message us on Instagram at Farmers Market Pros or email us at connect@farmersmarketpros.com. If you're looking for further education, check out our online course offerings at farmersmarketpros.com. Thanks for listening to Tent Talk. Please leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you access your podcasts, and tell us and others how you're enjoying Tent Talk. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss the next episode. Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is proudly produced by Farmers Market Pros, where passion meets profit. Today's episode was recorded and edited by Justine Marzoni-Mead. Original music by David Mead. Thank you so much for listening today, and we'll have another great episode next week, so tune in.